Good day. This is a brief summary of solutions. So basically, if you're struggling in this section, make sure you go back to specific videos to fix things up and or ask me for some assistance. The nature of solutions, that takes us back to chapter 2. We know it's a homogeneous mixture. It's so well mixed. It has a solute, or may have more than one solute in the solvent, and the solutes are completely dissolved, so it looks like one material. We are only going to worry about water-based solutions in this section. You can see general solubility considerations, polar and nonpolar solvents. It says not applicable, and we might touch on that when we do chemical bonding, but don't have to worry about it here. There will be some math, concentration of solutions, that takes you back to the wacky world of the mole. N equals CV, and figuring out if you have a high molarity or a low molarity. You should know the difference between a saturated and unsaturated solution. If you have a saturated solution, you have the maximum number of ions dissolved possible. If we add any more ions, we will get a precipitate. Unsaturated, you can add more ions without forming a precipitate. So roughly half the test will be on calculations. So it'll be simple stuff going back to the mole, the N equals CV things, and dilution questions. And then we will look at, at more exotic things, mixing solutions with no reaction and figuring out the concentration of all the ions, and mixing solutions getting a precipitate and figuring out the mass of the precipitate using a bit of stoich, and also possibly find the concentration of the background ions, the spectators. Conductivity. Well, you should know about electrolytes. You should know what things can conduct electricity and what things can't. And we know for us to have an electrolyte, it has to be aqueous, it has to be ionic, and what allows it to complete the circuit are mobile ions. That's why we need ions in solution. There'll be lots of questions about mixing solutions and determining if you get a precipitate, and that means you have to be able to write a formula equation, a full ionic equation, a net ionic equation, and you have to have them balanced every time. Charges have to balance, atoms have to balance, and you must include the states. And if you make a mistake, it makes things wrong. You also have to do qualitative analysis, which is probably the hardest thing in this section, which is, in this case, selective precipitation of ions. So you go after one ion, and you precipitate it out while leaving the others behind. So in other words, the chemical you add has to be insoluble with just one of the ions. Take it out, filter, then it gets easier as you go along as you remove the next ions one by one. There's lots of vocabulary in this section, and so these are words that you have to know what they mean. And you saw those on an early worksheet. And it reminds you about some of the assignments you may have done already, and other things at the end of the chapter from problems and challenge that are good practice for the test as well. So do your best to be ready for this test. It is one of the harder tests of the year, often because people underestimate it. They think it's going to be straightforward, and it is challenging. So best of luck.